Ladies and gentlemen, we have a phenomenal guest today, Andy Kaufman. If you're on LinkedIn, you have probably seen a post or a comment or a share from Andy. He's very active on social media. He has a large following. Andy is a renowned speaker, an author, an executive coach. He has 25 years of experience in tech and management. And one of my favorite things I read about Andy before this was he's empowered thousands of organizations like Microsoft, a lot of the Fortune 100. But the most specific one that I felt like was interesting was the UN, the
Mm.
United Nations. And I thought it would be beneficial for Andy to just share a quick tidbit, a story about dealing with the UN.
Yeah, it happened as a bit of a fluke where they were looking for a certain class, and I just happened to show up on Google, and it wasn't even a class that I teach very often, but it developed a relationship probably around 2010 or so, where do project management training for them and some leadership training. But one of the interesting, and I think one of the really fascinating aspects of a global organization like the UN is how do you come up with a common language and a common way of looking at things? And so, when I would normally teach in the US, I'd probably use more slang just in communicating. My examples would be, if I'm not careful, very US centric. And so it is a super fun challenge to teach in that environment of how to make this information relevant and because if you have somebody, we'll have somebody from Chad or Somalia in the same
Wow.
session with somebody from Paris, and just all that difference makes it really a fun challenge to how do we make even topics like today relevant.
Yeah, I'm sure that introduces a whole nother nuance of how to
Yeah,
engage
yeah.
those that you're trying to work with.
Hmm.
Culture is
Yeah,
something I seldom think about when I think about how to engage people that I'm
yeah,
trying to get to do things.
for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Andy is going to grace us with his wisdom today about a topic I am passionate about. So my name's Peter. I started Guide CX roughly 8 years ago. And one of the core reasons that I started Guide CX, they say the greatest products are built by the founder's greatest frustrations. And one of my greatest frustrations was leading people through a workflow, an implementation experience and trying to manage people that I don't manage.
Mm.
Oftentimes, that was the source of delays, of failures, of challenges, of getting people to do things that I didn't pay. And and that's essentially what we're going to talk a lot about today. Some flavors of that. The power to influence without authority. I'm going to do my best to stay quiet in the background, but one of my favorite books is written by Dale Carnegie, and that's how to win friends and influence people. And I think there's a lot of similarities that I think we'll probably discuss
Yeah,
with the book
yeah.
and with your content.
Our youngest two, Peter, the youngest two are 15 and 14, and I just paid them to read that book.
Oh, awesome.
So between Covey's Seven Habits and then How to Win Friends and Influence People. So they have to pass a test after the reading the book. But those are timeless. I mean, both those books are timeless, right? And that's
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
I just taught my 10-year-old about smiling when people talk to you. Smiling
Right.
is like sprinkling confetti on any conversation. That's what I told her. And that comes straight from that book.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah, that's good. All right. Well, let's start in this conversation about influence. And I want to be clear that if you join us today, you're not just a passive observer. Okay. So you're going to be actively involved. And Peter, you'd have to tell me whether or not they can unmute. Do we have the ability to unmute people or not? Do we have that ability or I
Yeah,
don't,
we can allow people to talk. I
I
see.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you all to actively join in on the chat for sure. And there might be times I don't see the ability on my side of it here to actually unmute them, but Peter, you might be able to with your controls.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could definitely unmute people as
But
needed.
let's start with this. And if you're listening on this, think about what are examples of when you need influence. Would you type that into the chat? Like some times when you need to influence, because we probably have more of those than what we realize. Okay. So type that into the chat. What would you say? I think of times, yeah, kids, school teachers, yeah, right on. Yeah.
Yeah, I put that. Sorry.
Yeah,
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 I
yeah.
told you I
No,
want
no,
to be
that's
quiet.
good. You're in on this. Yeah. Yeah. Dana, cross-departmental team projects. Isn't that the truth? Like it's one thing if somebody directly reports to you. It feels like, well, this is easy, you just tell them. But even in situations where someone reports to you, are you going to be the person who's just giving out orders? Are you going to influence there? The stuff we talk about today will actually help with that as well. Yeah. Yeah. Check it out. Sales and market onboarding, right on for sure. VP of Ops, no direct reports, right? Need to, right. This topic is your life. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm looking at somewhere when testing process carries on and on and on. Like sometimes, Jenny, I'm thinking of the situations where we have to ship, it's not ready, but we promised, but it's right, that tension of like how do we negotiate through those sort of situations?
Ju Hong says, when people don't believe their own greatness and I want to help them see it. I love that.
Juhong's here. That's my friend Juhong. And by the way, Juhong might be a future workshop for you out of this because that is exactly what he does.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. All those years working at Disney and doing what he does now. Yeah, yeah. It's a good list. Strategy discussions for the company when I'm not on the leadership team, right, Karen? If how do we get them to listen? So we'll talk about some things that can actually help with each one of these. Um, yeah, Daniel, the last minute impossible changes because of turnover. Yeah. Oh man, so many examples. So let me let me ask you this because inevitably when you have a conversation about influence, there's this fine line sometimes between influence and manipulation. Okay. So I'm curious, do any of you have an opinion of when do you cross that line where on this side of the line it's influence, which we tend to think of as more positive. Um, and on this side of the line, it's manipulation. So,
I like to think I'm just helping people realize they agree with me.
right. Yeah. Well, and actually, sometimes that might be the case, right? But, you can think of probably some salespeople that are like, would you just agree with me here, Peter? And they're going to use some manipulation. Yeah. I'm looking at, was it Janessa manipulating is more one-sided. I think that's actually a really interesting way of looking at it, right? Where we tend to think of manipulation as more one side. Yeah, it benefits me, but it doesn't benefit the other person if they really knew what was going on. Yeah, let's see what else. Megan, influence is guiding toward a mutually agreed. So that gets to this mutually beneficial side of it. Yeah, more of a forcing thing, Ritu is saying. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Let me give you a couple of examples. Yeah, Lisa, that's interesting. When it stops being a conversation, that's an interesting practical way of saying it. Give you two examples. One is I flew to a city, and at the airport, I was getting the rental car. And in the conversation, right near the end of the conversation, the person who's checking me in says, uh, "Would you like to get insurance with that?" And I found myself saying, no, I actually never get insurance, but I almost said yes. And so there was no one behind me. And so I just leaned over and said, "Hey, by the way, were you trained to nod your head when you asked that question?" Okay. Type into the chat. What do you think? She
Interesting.
said,
Yeah.
yeah. Was she trained? And you are exactly right if you said the word yes. She was trained to do it. Now, my guess is if you were that rental car company, they don't look at that as manipulation. They look at that as an upsell. Right? And so they look at that. But I took it as things like that are manipulation. They're trying to manipulate someone like. So the reason I bring this up is sometimes I think it can feel like a really fine line. Let me give you one more example. Uh, I learned about this from the Freakonomics podcast. They were talking about in the UK, they went from in their organ donation program, they went from an opt-in, like it is at least in Illinois. I don't know if that's nationwide in the states, but at least in Illinois, it's opt-in to you are in, but you can opt out, and enrollment skyrocketed. Okay, so without knowing anything more, type into the chat. Do you think that sounds like influence or manipulation to go from opt in to you are in, and now you can opt out. What do you think? Type it in the chat. Do, so, I don't know, Peter, I'm seeing mostly manipulation there, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting.
It's a hard
Um,
topic. Yeah.
well, I think one way to judge it might be exit interviews and say, if you ask somebody like, do you realize you just signed up to give away your kidneys? Like, like if you ask people and they go, what, then that's probably a manipulation. But interestingly, my understanding of it, and I've talked to people from the UK about this as well, they knew about it. And so most people would be like, it was just the right thing to do. But you didn't do it before. I know, but it's for the greater good. And so where it kind of came down, yeah, it does. This might even be an example, Christy, from Nudge, because it's the Nudge unit over there that actually helps with things like this. And what it seems like, what it comes down to is we tend to not want to change from the default. So if we're already opted out, we tend to not want to opt in. If we're already in, we don't want to opt out. And so, an example, a guest on the podcast on Book About Influence said that a hospital wanted to increase the number of generics that were being prescribed, but the doctors, it was hard to change their habits, but they changed the default in the system to the generic, and so the default was actually that. And so by making that the default, they saved millions of dollars. So exactly. And Karen's got example. I've heard this one multiple times. You're in the 401k. You're in the 401k. Now you can opt out, but they found that the savings rates increased. So you might think, well, it's somewhat interesting, but how did,
Interesting.
yeah, but here, I don't know, Peter, if you've ever done this, but I wouldn't say I do it regularly, but I'll do it every once in a while. Of like, if I don't hear from you by next Friday, we'll move forward with this. Now, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, if it's Thursday night at 5 p.m., that's probably more manipulation. But if they actually have time to really think about it, I found that can be kind of a handy technique.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting. We're in soccer season.
yeah,
And the soccer club, one of my daughters signed up for, part of the fee, they said, hey, there's $200 tacked on for a volunteer fee. And, but you can have that refunded if you volunteer
I
and
get,
if you track
I
your
like it.
hours,
Yeah,
but you're going to
yeah,
pay it forward. So I thought,
I like
oh,
it.
that's
Yeah, I like it.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Our daughter's volleyball team does that same sort of thing. You can fundraise. Now, you don't have to fundraise, but if you fundraise, it takes it off your fee, right? So
Mhm.
there's like a motivation there, but you know it ahead of time what that fee is. So I just think it's kind of interesting that I want to be clear that it is not our intention at all today to talk about anything that's manipulative. Like it's to talk about how do we do this in an ethical way that is mutually beneficial, because the world is filled with examples of people. And I don't mean this as a cynical view, but I think in fact, I've heard some people say all marketing is manipulation, all sales is manipulation. And I don't agree that it has to be that way. In fact, the best sellers know that it has to be mutually beneficial. Right? That's the only way to retain customers for the long term.
Mhm.
But I sat in our Peter, I was in our dining room, and we don't have like these big trees on our property, but just enough that the leaves sometimes get in the gutters and it's kind of gets a mess. This guy's like, well, here's the price if you buy today, but if I leave, this is the price. And I'm like, so I can't call you tomorrow and get that same price as today? He goes, nope. I'm like, well, let's go to the door, because that's just pure manipulation, right?
Yeah.
He's afraid that I'll find out other information. So it's not about manipulation. It is about how do we do this thing called influence in a way that benefits everybody, right? That's really what we're trying to do. And so what I'm going to do is, in the short time that we have together here, is what are some specific lessons that I've either learned from the school of hard knocks, so to speak, or most of it is from interviewing people on our People and Projects podcast. I can say, Peter, I had zero vision when I started the podcast in 2009. I'm sure it was only my parents who listened to the first episode or whatever. But, hundreds of episodes later, what I realized is there's so much wisdom out there. And if we
Yeah.
can tap into that wisdom, that of how, what are ways to be able to do this ethically? And
Well,
so
I've looked before this. You're almost to 1,000 episodes. That's incredible.
well, you know what? We're actually just under 500, but there's enough of them out there that it's finally it's more than just my mom and dad listening. So,
No,
but
awesome.
one of the interviews when it comes to this topic was with Peter Bregman and Howie Jacobson. And Juhong, that's so kind of you to say in the chat. I really appreciate that. You've been a big supporter for so many years. But here's an interesting lesson that they said. Check out the title of their book. You can change other people. Now, doesn't that sound at least a little presumptuous? You know, you can change other people. I would say ultimately the book is less about you can change other people and more about how do we create the environment in which people are willing to change. Because if I've learned anything about this, Peter, and for the rest of us, the more I push to try to change somebody else, almost always it backfires, right? You know,
Mhm.
like I don't tend to comment on social media about politics or anything like that because does anybody really change their opinion because of a social media post on politics, right? So it's one of those things where um, yeah, how do we create the environment that that person on your team wants to comply with a new process or that stakeholder or that boss wants to sign off on time? How do you do it? And their first step is what you see up on the screen right now. Be an ally, not a critic. Okay. Now, just lock that one in for a second because I've never had this conversation with somebody and they go, "Oh, that's good to know because I've got a real critic problem." Like,
Mhm.
I don't think we typically see ourselves as the critic. But I'm curious, and Peter, I'd be curious on your take on this while other people type into the chat. Can you think of any subtle, or maybe not so subtle, but some subtle ways that we could come off as a critic or at least not as an ally? Type into the chat. And Peter, what do you think? What's a way that we might subtly come off as a critic?
Yeah, well, so Dale Carnegie talks about this a little bit, and I love the quote is criticism is like a boomerang. It always comes back to bonk you. Uh, and I think living your life in such a way where you assume the best. I grew up hearing my dad always tell me, the greatest offense is to take offense when no offense was intended.
Hmm.
Um,
Isn't
so I
that
think I
good?
think you could always find reasons to, be skeptical, to be disappointed, to not trust. But to me, an ally is someone that assumes the best. They're an
Hmm.
advocate, and they're not trying to get you in certain circumstances and catch you in a
Right.
statement or a lie.
Yeah, you don't feel like you're being litigated when you're having a conversation against them, right?
Hmm.
You can tell when someone you can tell when someone's like, how do we make this work? Like yeah, I hear your concern. Like I've gotten so much mileage, Peter, out of the three words. Tell me more. Right?
Yeah, the
Just
intent.
tell me more. Right. Yeah, tell me more. Like, and not just as a formula, tell me more. It's like to really try to understand like where are they coming from? I want to get some of the comments here. Megan says, best community I was ever part of had a baseline rule to assume positive intent. Right. Yeah. If you think someone's a jerk. And isn't it interesting, Megan, how we don't typically say you're a jerk, right? We don't say that, but it can like one guest said, it leaks out of us, right? In our body language, our facial expressions, and things like that. So we can come off as a critic. Yeah, Karen, ally when the correction is buffered by encouragement. Right. So even Carnegie, I think it was one of his first points: never criticize, condemn, or complain. I think it's what it
Yeah.
is, right? And
Mhm.
I know sometimes people are like, well, but my job as a leader is to help people grow. And sometimes that means I need to give them critical feedback. But it's this idea that even when you give somebody what might be considered constructive or critical feedback, correction of some sort, is it clear that we are for them, not against them as people, right? Like, is
Yeah.
it that and people can tell when that's the case. Man, I love all this reinforcing of what you said about the assuming positive intent, Peter. Yeah, then
I,
seek to understand, right? So goes back
yeah.
to Covey
They
there.
don't care
Yeah,
how much you know until they know how much you care.
right.
I
Yeah.
think I think a lot of it too. I think of examples in my life where I felt like I was maybe being manipulated or pushed to do something. It always came from someone who was a quote unquote know-it-all.
Mm,
Um, like the approach wasn't humble.
yeah, right. Right. Yeah, and it that you can do that in obvious or even little subtle ways. Like
Hmm.
Juhong says here about asking questions that we secretly are asking to prove that the other person's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I can think of a leader once where I was in this meeting. He's a CEO, and he asked a question to this group, and I said something. This is super early in my career, and he goes, "Well, I think what Andy's saying is," and he said something else. It was not even remotely what I was saying, and it just took it like he's not really listening. He's not really trying to understand here. And so the here's the point I just want to make on this one is if you want to influence someone, whether this is a direct report, if this is a colleague, if this is a boss, it has to be clear that you are an ally. Yeah, Juhang, it's almost like some people use that as an excuse to be overly harsh, right? Yeah, direct and positive. Yeah, right. I'm thinking of all the stuff you're learning, Juhang, with NLP and stuff like that. Like there's ways to do this in a positive, non-manipulative sort of way, right? And so I think it's worth watching. By the way, I think everything we're talking about today can apply at home as well. Right?
Yeah,
I
for
think of this
sure.
as I think of this as a father of five kids. It's like, am I the one who's finding the problems? Uh, with an intent to almost like come off as catching them making mistakes as opposed to like, hey, here's why we're having this conversation, right? Help them see the bigger picture.
Yeah, there's three things I kind of grew up being reinforced by my parents that I try to do for my four daughters. And the three
Hmm.
lessons I hope they learn
Yeah.
are I'm their biggest fan.
Mhm.
Um, two is everything's going to be okay. And then three is love, not judge. Like nothing you do will
Mhm.
ever, make me think less of you. And
Yeah.
that
So
I think to your point of these lessons kind of supersede all throughout life. I think that goes the other way. If you foster an environment where your customers and your employees know that everything's going to be okay,
yeah, right.
that you're their biggest fan,
Yeah.
and love not judge
Yeah.
in a professional way, um, I think you get exponential performance and
That's so
engagement.
good. I love that, Peter, because I think sometimes in project world, it's not a matter of if things will go wrong, it's when they go wrong, right? And,
Yeah,
and so, and if it's like, Andy's hair on fire, I'm not going to be as effective at influence them as like, okay, this is an issue, and this is, here's a plan, and here's some options, right? It keeps it balanced that way. It's
yeah,
it's going to be okay, right? We can find a way to
we're going
make
to be
this happen.
okay. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. It's not denying reality. It's actually saying, I have this belief that we're going to be able to figure it out. Even if we haven't figured it out yet, this belief we're going to be able to figure it out. That
Yeah.
goes a long way for sure.
It's interesting. My grandfather lived to be 104 years old, and he has these little yellow notepads, so I'm kind of thumbing through.
Yeah.
And, these are lessons. He was a teller at Bank of America, and
Mhm.
he wrote little quotes. There's 98 little notepads that I have in this box in my storage unit. And I
Mhm.
take one out every time I go to my storage unit to get anything. And um, you think of the quotes in here, there's nothing permanent except change. Examine the future, then challenge the present. The challenge of tomorrow begins today. Change is not made without inconvenience. It's perspective.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
we can help people have that correct perspective, then change won't paralyze them.
I,
Challenges won't paralyze them.
I think Megan's got a good idea there in the chat about time to publish. That is, yeah,
It
it's
is
time
cool.
to
It's
time
one of the
to
treasures.
give Granddad his props here, and yeah, that's cool. You know, when it comes to influencing someone, something that has been so influential for me is it comes from the Neuro Leadership Institute, a guy named David Rock, and he calls it SCARF, and it's an acronym. And this acronym, it's a rare week that I don't look at a situation through the lens of SCARF. Okay. And so he'd say this is the brain works that first of all, the S stands for status, which he would say the brain is a status seeking machine. It's a status conscious machine
Interesting.
that but now interestingly, like when I'm doing work with the UN in it's a very hierarchical organization, as many organizations are. And so sometimes status would be like job grade, or someone might, throw around their job grade. But I would say generally speaking, we don't, and in most cultures, we don't walk around saying, Brittany, you are so lower status than me. Right? Like we don't, those words don't come out, right? But I don't know. I'd be interested in people listening in the chat if you'd type in like, what are some things that have been done to you or that you've seen other people do that, whether it was intended or not, had the potential to reduce someone else's status? What is something that someone might do, maybe even unwittingly, but it ended up reducing someone else's status?
So is this pointing to identity? Like, do I matter? How do I matter?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because what's a way to feel like you don't matter is like discounting someone's feedback, right? Like, someone go, well, Peter, that'll never work, right? Or um, you know, in just sometimes it can even be body language, of of disrespect or not giving, yeah, drunk. And you're new here, aren't you? Right, that'll reduce the status.
And how many years of experience do you have?
Yeah, right. Yeah, don't have time, dumb idea, talking over when they right, talking over them, interrupting them. I interviewed the authors of a book called Good Guys: How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. And they said in their research they found women are interrupted 3 times more often than men. And
Wow.
so I tell you, once you hear about that, you can't unsee it. And so that interrupting, it can be an example. Yeah, Morgan, I'm checking that out. Told me wouldn't get laid off in the acquisition because I was so cheap. Oh yeah, great. Oh my goodness, unbelievable. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The way people throw around titles. At one company in the Chicago area, they actually have been acquired, so they don't exist as an organization anymore. But people would go around saying, "I'm a 36." I'm like, what is it, job grade? They go, no, we count the number of ceiling tiles you have in your office. And so the more ceiling tiles you have, the more important you are. I'm like, is
Oh
this like
man.
absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous? But here's my point in this one. That is insane, right? So here's my point. If you want to influence somebody, make sure you don't undercut their status. The way I like to say it is never kick somebody in the S, all right, just to make it more memorable. Never reduce someone's status. And I don't think we maybe even intend to, but I see it in healthcare sometimes. Do a lot of work in pharma as well as in academia. I teach MBA classes at Loyola's Business School in Chicago. In academia, sometimes like, oh, you're not a PhD, or in pharma, it might be, oh, you're not an MD. It's easy for things like that in subtle ways to reduce someone's status. You want to influence somebody, raise their status. Like raising someone else's status does not reduce ours.
Yeah.
Celebrate with them, recognize them. Right? I mean, it's just
Well,
if you raise people's status. Yeah, Karen, I think you're right. Yeah, actually, Karen, I know you well enough to know you've been on the other end of that before. So it is interesting to raise people's status.
and
I
I
think
think
it's yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I just think of our society in general. Like we are putting people labels on peoples and groups of peoples and trying to define them as maybe the media defines them. And I think half of
right,
it is seeing people as humans and
yeah, right.
and understanding their innate value.
Oh yeah,
That's
right. Yeah, and in today's world, one way to actually do that is to just be present, right?
yeah,
Just to be present with them because there's all these things trying to distract us. So one
such a
way
good
to
point.
just is just like yeah, stay present with them. The C of scarf is certainty, provide certainty. Okay, and so what does this mean? If you want to influence somebody, if you're in there like, well, we're not exactly sure how it's going to go. It could, I mean, like, how can you put together a plan of like, this is what we're going to pursue. This is how often you're going to hear from me. And this will be our process when something doesn't go right. This is how often, I mean, the more we provide certainty, it's easier to influence somebody. But if all of a sudden we're in a meeting and I say something unpredictable or something, they're like, wait, I thought he was on top of this. Maybe not. If you inject uncertainty into a situation, it's going to be more difficult. Yeah. And so I think people with project backgrounds have an advantage here. Like we tend to think risk management. We tend to think stakes in the ground, milestones, things like that. So if you want to influence somebody, consider how can you provide more certainty? Not that we live in a world that offers 100% certainty, but can we provide more certainty? Right?
Yeah. I
That's a
think
way to do it.
I think of examples in like our consumer lives. I think the
Hmm.
best companies in the world make it so I don't have to call them to put my
Right.
mind at ease.
Right.
Like an example might be like Delta tells me in one of my bags, get on the plane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I now like if I have a tight connection or I'm late checking in, I have greater confidence and my anxiety is reduced. I have certainty. Um, that Amazon doesn't, I don't call up Jeff Bezos when my package is late. He tells me it's late.
Right.
Like there's a problem, but I'm okay because I know I'm going to get it.
Mm,
There's certainty there.
yeah.
And then we do that at Guide CX too, a little bit too through our product, but that's phenomenal. That's kind of a version of it's going to be okay.
Yeah,
In
it
a
is.
lesson that you
Right.
give a kid.
I like that. I like that tie back. That's really good, Peter. The way David Rock talks about it is like our brain is a prediction machine. And so when things go the way we predict, then that's certainty, right? And so can we, how much of life comes down to managing expectations? You know, like
Yeah.
my wife and I just celebrated 37 years of marriage. Like
Oh,
a lot
congrats.
of marriage is setting expectations. And so same with the people we're trying to influence, like this, you can trust us on this. Um, regardless of any technique, one CIO, he told me that credibility is currency. Credibility is currency, like, and that doesn't even just have to mean more compensation. That could just mean you want more say, you want more influence, credibility. Do what you say you'll do, right? And
Hmm.
and so provide certainty
And to
is
Lisa's
this.
point, I like that comment she made. She goes, certainty also can mean transparency. And I
Yeah,
think transparency is a way to increase credibility. I think there's a
absolutely.
symbiotic relationship between all
Yeah,
that.
I think you're exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. So status, certainty. The A stands for autonomy. And so the idea of this one is mandates often fail, not because it's a bad idea, but because people push back. And so, and there might be times you have to say, everyone must comply. This is our new process. This is our new tool. You might have to do it that way. But if you can find ways to provide options, it's almost always better that then people feel like they're more in control. So then you can choose which options you make available to them, but it's almost always better to go in, here's the issue, here's some options on how to deal with it, then here's the issue, or this is the only way to be able to deal with it.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah. So finding some ways to give some options to people.
A
Almost
form of
always.
that is you being late isn't the culprit. I always tell people that like when the pilot gets on the loudspeaker telling you they're going to be 15 minutes late from pushing back from the gate, the
Hmm.
next statement is, "Don't worry, we can fly faster. We'll be on time."
Hmm.
So there's an option to burn more gas.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and uh, and in the project experiences, one of the things we found as a good lesson is to provide that similar outlook of if your updates are communicating an at-risk status, you need to lay out a path to help them understand how they de-risk. How can you fly faster? If you're late,
Yeah.
uh, project management tools like GuideCX can help you understand how can I decrease duration.
Right. Right.
And historically, where have I been able to decrease duration on some of these
Yeah.
tasks?
Right.
And that might be a form of giving someone an
Right.
option.
I think you're right. And Peter, there were times where I just was like, no, it can't be done. One of the things you learn over time is we can't, we can do anything. Actually, Karen, this might have been a line from you once upon a time. We can do anything, we just can't do everything. So what are the trade-offs? What are the best options? And there are often more options than what we realize.
Yeah,
So when you're trying to influence someone later this week into this summer as we go into it, just think, can I give them options? Almost always that's going to be better off. The R is the relatedness. And the idea behind relatedness is you're if somebody feels like an insider, it's a different sort of thing, influence situation than if somebody feels like an outsider. You know, so as the guy who founded the Harvard International Program on Negotiation, it's a really interesting discussion. Dan Shapiro, he says that we're all tribal. Yeah, like there are parts of the world where they literally call out tribes. They specifically think of themselves as tribes. And in the U.S., we don't tend to think of it that way, but we have tribes, right? I mean, we have tribes within organizations. There's the departmental silos, and there's tribes. If you want to influence someone, one of the things that Dan Shapiro said is be part of multiple tribes. Like when you walk in,
Hmm.
so I grew up as a software developer, and often there's like this friction between developers and marketing or sales. Like they're promising things and we have to somehow clean up after them. But but it's not us versus them. The more you can kind of reduce this feeling of us versus them, and it's more we, even though that sounds kind of cheesy, it's one of those things that the more it feels like, I know you, I trust you, I know you're reasonable, that it's easier to influence somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of the discovery oftentimes when you're trying to engage someone in a like a new customer experience is the discovery is pointed out the organization and not the individual.
Mm,
And to your point about relatedness, if you can understand how the individual gets promoted, how they get paid, how they get
yeah,
incentivized, how to make them look like a hero,
right.
um, that's where the magic happens.
Absolutely. That's so good. And then finally, the F stands for fairness. And I mean, you could argue that it's not a fair world, I suppose, but can we make it as fair as possible? So if I ask people for their opinion, does it look like I actually at least considered it, even if I don't end up agreeing with it? Does it look like I think of it sometimes as procedural justice, like the process we followed, did it seem fair? Now, any one of these, when that's missing, it's going to make it more difficult to influence someone. So when you're trying to influence someone, raise their status, provide as much certainty as you can, give them options if it's possible. You may not be able to get every one of these letters, but relatedness, build relationships. You could argue in many ways that the dirty little secret of business is everything comes down to relationships. Right? So you don't just you don't just network because you're looking for a job. Right? You are building relationships all the time. That's breathing as far as a professional world because it's going to help us influence not just manipulation, right? But for mutual benefit and try to keep it fair. Dr. Robert Cialdini is known as the godfather of influence, and he's written a number of books on it. But one technique that he shares in his classic book on this topic is he calls it ask for a commitment. And here's the example that he gives in the book that it's a restaurant taking a reservation. So let's say, Peter, you're making the reservation, you're calling, I'm at the restaurant. And at the end of the call, I go, okay, Peter, we got you down for a party at 2 Saturday night at 6:30. And, by the way, if you can't make it, Peter, just give us a call. We'll see you Saturday night. That's a pretty normal way to do it. And it was a good restaurant. Most people showed up. But of the people who did not show, 30% of them did not call.
Hmm.
And, I mean, that's enough when margins are kind of thin at restaurants that they could have freed up that table for someone else. They held that table for a while. So they changed the script just this little bit. Hey, Peter, we got you down for a party of 2 Saturday night at 6:30. And by the way, Peter, if you can't make it, will you call us? Pause. Now, Peter, what would you say?
Yes.
I mean, without even thinking,
Yeah.
right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, without even thinking, you'd say yes or
Hmm.
sure or something like that. That simple question dropped the number of no shows without a call from 30% to 10% overnight.
Interesting.
Well, what I think is so interesting is it made me reflect, Peter, of like, how did I used to do this? I used to do things like, let me know if you have any issues or get back to me with any questions. And upon reflection, that's kind of a weak approach instead of, will you have this done Friday night before you leave? Pause. Now, they they might say yes. And Cialdini would say if they say yes, they're more likely to do it, but I may still want to check in end of day today, maybe noon tomorrow, not to be annoying, but just see if there's any way I can help them. But in the chat, what do you think about this? If I say, hey, will you have this done Friday night before you leave the office? Pause, and they say no. Now what do you do? Because it's not just asking a question. It's not a guarantee. Yeah, ask them why,
That's the
right,
why.
Ben? All right, yeah, you can ask them why. When, yeah, when will you? Right on, yeah. What's getting in the way? Now, if you do that as an ally, not a critic, right? You're asking with genuine curiosity. Like, is there anything? Is there anything my team and I could do? And they go, well, here's the deal. Tomorrow after noon, I'm on vacation. I'm gonna be gone for the next 2 weeks. Say, okay, well, listen, I could stay late tonight. Is there anything our team could do for you in the morning? Right? What works for you is what Daniel's saying. Like, do you see the options? And what I see in project world too often is something's due, let's say a week from tomorrow. So it's due that following Friday. But by not asking for a commitment, we only find out that it's not going to be done a week from Friday, right? It's too late. Then we're being very reactive. So this is a way to try to get ahead of it, asking for a commitment. And if it's done with genuine curiosity and respect as an ally, and we look for options of what can we do to help, it actually goes a long way.
Yeah,
The
that's
uh,
that's phenomenal. I think I posted about this. We have some data in Guide CX that analyzes how people phrase their call to actions. So you imagine we're a project management solution, and we have an external view to the customer that asks the customer to do certain things that you need them to do throughout a workflow.
yeah,
And we had AI scan the sentiment of those call to actions, and we kind of classified them as passive and direct. And those with direct call to actions had a higher completion rate than those with passive call to action items.
I like
And
it.
so the way you ask for information, I think this is a phenomenal point.
Well, and I think, I mean, part of it might be I've lived in the Midwest my whole life, and so there might be Midwest nice, where you get a little more passive, perhaps, than if this was in Manhattan, or in the Netherlands. Some cultures are more direct, perhaps something like that. But what I find is, in fact, I want to get Linnell's comment. Use it just this morning with the vendors notorious for not following through.
Got a
Right
commitment.
on. Right. That's
Yeah.
a great point. It's one of those things that once you learn it, you can look for opportunities. Like I'm committed to never using these techniques with my wife, okay, but I'll use it with our kids. Ask for a commitment, and so give it a try. Sometime in the next week, give it a try. I found that you'll usually get some version of yes, no, or maybe, and then you can kind of
You
look for
learn.
options. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, for
Like
sure.
Juhan said, what can I do to help you meet the deadline?
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
that's an
Right.
ally.
What a respectful way to do it. Right.
Yeah.
This one also comes from Cialdini, and help them see what they will lose. And the reason why I wanted to bring this one up is I feel like everything I was taught about influence was tell them what they will benefit from. If you do this, here are the benefits. And by the way, that's actually good advice, right? Help them see the positive consequences that would come if they do this. But here's an interesting thing Cialdini said during the interview. He goes, "We don't use scarcity enough," which I think this is counterintuitive. But he said, when there's a lot of uncertainty, like you're trying to influence to do something, but they're like, well, there's some good parts of this, there's some bad part of that. I don't know what to do. People get paralyzed. And he goes, when people seem to be just frozen, he says, go to scarcity. And what he means by that is, what will they lose if they don't go forward? And
Mm.
so this comes from somebody mentioned before the nudge unit over in the UK in the book Nudge. They use this phrase, I would hate for us to miss out on. Okay. That's a version of this. Now you can see how some of this could be manipulation. But for example, if there's a certain pricing, we've got another month yet before the quarter is done, but it might be there's going to be a change in price at the end of the quarter. Maybe a company's going to respond differently to the tariffs or something like that. We can get that pricing now, but it's going to be gone later. So a version of scarcity might be this pricing is available between now and the end of June. I would hate for us to miss out on what might be a higher price. Right? That's a
And I
version of
love the
scarcity.
way you're phrase. Sorry to interrupt,
Oh
Andy.
yeah, yeah, that's cool.
I don't know if you did it on purpose, but it's not. I would hate for you to miss out on this.
Yeah, right.
You said us.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think the way anytime that it feels like you're making my life harder by not doing this, then it's not the ally thing, right? And so finding a way, for example, and you'd have to judge whether you think this is helpful, but somebody's just dragging their feet on something, or they don't want to change about something. Say, listen, I know one of the things that helps position someone for a promotion is they follow the process, they lead in these areas. I would hate for you to not have the opportunity to be considered for this. Like this is something that can help you. I feel like there's a little bit of a sell the benefit, but also what happens if you don't move on this. But I've never watched a second of Game of Thrones. We don't have HBO. I don't know really anything about it, but a different guest said, tell people that winter is coming. Okay. So for those of you that watch Game of Thrones, you might know anything more about this, but it's not literally that the season of winter is coming. It is, what is the ominous foreboding if something doesn't happen? You know? And so don't use this in a manipulative sort of way. But I found that I hate for us to miss out on, or some version of scarcity. It's tapping into the fear of missing out, I suppose.
Mhm.
And you can see how this is manipulation. If I'm on an e-commerce site and they say only 3 remaining, like, is Amazon not going to replenish? Like, it, you could see how this can be a manipulation thing as well. But help people see what they will lose. And then the last one I have here for you is, it comes from a guy named Tim David, who wrote this book on influence. And he talks about the importance of gratitude. And the reason I want to bring this up is, if you've been trying to influence someone for a while and then they finally do it, on my best days, I exude gratitude. On my worst days, I'm like, finally, like, you finally did it. And this is specifically what he said in the book. People stop wanting to help when they feel even a hint of ingratitude.
Mhm.
And I think maybe it's another version of the relatedness. Maybe it's a version of the ally thing. But I've had to learn this the hard way, Peter, that it doesn't matter if I feel gratitude, am I expressing the gratitude? If gratitude that goes unexpressed is experienced by other people as ingratitude. And
Mhm.
in fact, when I was interviewing Cialdini, I asked him, of all the stuff you teach about and read about, which is the most difficult for you to do yourself? It was this. Because a team member does something, in my mind, I'm like, wow, that was a great presentation they made, but it doesn't travel to my mouth to thank them for the research that they did, and the things that contributed to that. So I think most of us like to think of ourselves as people who have gratitude and express it, but I think sometimes we need this reminder that, if maybe this is another version of the critic, that if we're not doing this, it can come off as we're speaking up only when we see the problems, not expressing the gratitude. Anything
And the
you've learned on
opposite of
this one,
that
Peter?
is entitlement.
Right.
Like I don't think anything would make my parents more disappointed in me when I acted entitled. Uh,
Mm,
and I think our customers see the same. Uh, Attitude of gratitude, I think, unlocks um, the human spirit.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many reasons why this could just be a session in and of itself, right? Like Robert Emmons, I don't remember what school in Florida he's at, but he's like, gratitude is the ultimate performance enhancing substance. I think is what he said. Yeah. It's like, if somebody feels like the extra effort's not going to be recognized or appreciated, they're just not going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Karen,
People like
that's
to
a
be
great way to say
appreciated.
it. I just wanted to go through a couple scenarios before we wrap up, just to kind of see how this would work. And I'm curious, in the chat, what do you think about this? Let's say you're the project manager and you're trying to get the sponsor to sign off on a funding request. Okay? And to you, it feels like the sponsor's just dragging their feet. Maybe that they're ghosting you. Maybe that it feels like they are nodding their head, but the ink doesn't hit the paper, so to speak. Can you think of a way to influence a situation like that? It could be related to what we just talked about, or it could be some other idea that you have. What do you think? What could you do to try to get a funding request? Peter, I thought this was kind of funny. Someone told me once that one way they influence situations like this is they got every other person that had to sign off on it to get them to sign off first, and then they go to the person who was dragging their feet, and it felt safer to that person because all these other people have done it as well, right? So
Yeah.
that's like a different sort of influence technique.
I think that's a version of transparency.
Hmm.
If there's a transparent interface that helps everyone understand who's holding up the process,
Hmm.
then there can be some intrinsic accountability.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that. And
Use
maybe
some.
some of that transparency could be the C of scarf, like give more certainty of it, because sometimes people don't want to fund something because they're not sure it's going to be used well, right? So this is how we're going to use. This is how you'll hear from me. I'm checking out, Leo. Use something they need as a motivator, right? A timeline, a due date. If you sign by here, maybe also Cialdini's scarcity. What happens if they don't sign off by then? Maybe there's some dependencies on other groups, and we'll miss a window of time, and so that'll delay some things. Carrie just mentioned that she experienced this Yeah. Resent the pad form just in case they misplaced it. Right. So assuming intent, positive intent, you're not assuming they're a slacker. Yeah. Had the team lead send it originally. So I followed up. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Karen is 6, all the above. Right. Yeah. You don't have to pick just one of these. In fact, um, one of the things that a number of people have said in interviews on this topic, they say all these are better um, when you've like, what's the phrase? You have to dig the well before you're thirsty. You don't walk up to somebody and go, "Hey, hey, I'm an ally." Like, hey, you want to do lunch? Like, yeah, like building relationships ahead of time. All of these could benefit for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I love that comment.
Yeah. So Ben, I would probably just check in to find out what the problem is. Yeah, with genuine curiosity. Like what's Brene Brown's line? In the absence of data, we always make up stories. And so I'm a pretty good story writer in my head. This person's a slacker, irresponsible, out to get me. No, they're all just stories. Like genuinely check in to find out what's going on. Yeah, Leo, I see you went scarcity. It's good. And I think a fair way, right? An honest way. Lack of certainty. I think that's right, George. Yeah. Yeah, excited about, so show some excitement about it. Um, in that True Influence book, he talks about confidence. So somebody told me recently that they walked into a boss's office and she said, "All right, you're probably going to say no," but and the boss stopped her right away and said, "Stop."
No, yeah.
And he goes, "Don't say that." She goes, "I didn't say it." He goes, "Oh yeah, you did." What did she say, Peter?
But
Well, yeah, the but right even before that was that you're probably going to say no, and the but, right? You're right. I'm both. So it's one of
yeah,
those things of, do I look like they should say yes? Do I look like they should fund it, or does it come off of like, spend money or don't spend money? It doesn't matter to me. Like, am I showing of why this is important?
yeah. Or you lead sentences with "I'm so sorry for your," or "I apologize to," yeah,
And Christy, I like that point about giving them agency, which is a version of the autonomy of Scarf. That's something that I agree 100%. You know, there's all kinds of stuff we could talk about, Peter, but as we move towards wrapping this up, uh, there's no there's no single technique that will work for influencing. It all depends on the person. I think so much of it comes down to relationship and trust. I really think there's a lot of wisdom in that CIO's comment that credibility is currency. So let's be people who are building credibility. Let's be people who are building relationships. Let's be people that are really, truly curious allies of trying to figure out how can we raise their status and do things in a fair way. I think a lot of this comes down to, what's the secret to influencing? Be a good human. Like
yeah.
in many respects, that's kind of a theme throughout all this. So I
This is phenomenal. Yeah.
thanks, Peter. Thanks for the invitation to actually even be a part of this. I'm a big fan of what you do, and I know you're providing value to people all over, man. So it's an honor to be able to be part of this.
It means a ton coming from you, Andy. And what I love about topics like this is it, and you said it at the very end, it makes us better humans, better parents, better friends,
Yeah,
better advocates. And I'm in the middle of my professional career, and the longer I get in my career, the more I realize the importance of aligning yourselves with individuals like you, and those that are sincere in heart, and want and understand kind of this concept of rising tide rises all
yeah,
ships.
right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for the invitation. And I tell you, there's so many people on this list here that I know who are living what we talked about. So you attract good company here, Peter.
Awesome. Well, Ju Hong, I want to have you on the next podcast. So
Do it.
Andy's recommendation means the world to me. So I'll reach out
Absolutely.
to you if I can get your contact information. Thank you so much for everyone that's joined, and have a phenomenal day. Know that everything's going to be all right. I'm your biggest fan, and love, not judge.
That's great. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Andy.
Cheers.